Signals flaring again, dead relay over Karachi orbit. Third time this week. Commander Rain Voss didn't turn. He kept his eyes locked on the layered overlays scrolling across the curved heads-up display above his station. Behind him, the young systems officer waited, tapping fingers against the reinforced alloy console, his tone light, too light for someone watching a planet being boxed in like livestock. "Patch the decay loop," Voss said finally. His voice carried the weight of someone who no longer explained himself. "Make it look like thermal expansion cracked the transmit plates." "Again?" the officer asked, eyebrows raised. Voss glanced over his shoulder. "They're not looking for malice. They're expecting failure. Feed them exactly that." The officer nodded, the bravado gone from his face, replaced by a grim understanding. He bent over his console, the light from the display painting his cheekbones in harsh cyan. Outside the narrow viewport, Earth spun silently, its cloud belts streaked like bruises, city grids dark beneath orbital smog, comm towers flickering as if gasping. The year was 2341, and humanity was silent by design. From the Council's perspective, Earth had been locked out, quarantined under Protocol Writ 7. No gate access, no trading rights, every quantum channel frozen beneath layers of diplomatic ice. To the dozen species of the Galactic Council, humanity had been written off as a failed variable, unpredictable, emotionally unstable, tactically unsound. In reality, Earth had rehearsed its collapse like a theater troupe obsessed with shadows. They watched through Council surveillance, expecting power failures, geopolitical fracturing, environmental degradation. So Earth obliged. They staged the riots, let the orbital scaffolds crumble, sabotaged their own data corridors with just enough elegance to look like negligence. It wasn't surrender, it was camouflage. And Voss was the one holding the curtain ropes. "Show me the L5 drift," he said. His second officer, older, leaner, with skin like weathered parchment, brought up the corridor. The image flooded in, a rotating band of derelict Council maintenance shells spinning gently near the 5th Lagrange point. Inside one of them, buried beneath 7 layers of rebranded alloy and scrapped thermal shielding, sat the heart of Earth's final strategy. "Give me thermal profiles," Voss instructed. The screen resolved into color-coded vectors, all within baseline range, nothing detectable, nothing that looked alive. Yet buried inside those old stations was something living. A different kind of heartbeat. "Project Echelon." He stood and walked the length of the command deck. The artificial gravity in this sector was inconsistent, creating a constant low-level tug under the arches of his feet. The air smelled like treated polymers and filtered carbon, clean in theory, but old enough to taste on the back of the tongue. Voss stopped at the primary viewport and placed a hand against the glass. From this angle, Earth didn't look cornered. It looked patient. 22 years earlier, before the collapse was finalized, before the Council's vote had even gone public, Earth's Strategic Command had greenlit a contingency that no civilization had ever attempted. Not mass retaliation, not diplomatic manipulation, but long-range silence warfare. Hide everything. Let the galaxy forget. Then reappear at the pivot point. Oblivion array had been the phrase on the initial directive. A misdirection term. The name they used in official leaks to suggest weapon burial or cultural preservation. In truth, it was something far colder. 87 vessels, designed to generate zero detectable emissions. Black body hulls coated in radiation-absorbing lattices. Engineered to nestle within gravitational null zones. Anchored by predictive orbital drift. Powered by neutrino-fed fission stacks that cycled deep enough to mimic planetary heat signatures. They weren't just invisible, they were anonymous. "Fleet status?" Voss asked aloud. A third officer responded, her voice steady, eyes fixed on the scrolling diagnostics. 79 assets dormant, 6 cycling through phase recalibration, 2 currently undergoing integrity mapping, 0 visible surface anomalies. And AI compliance? Level 5, no behavior flags, command chain intact. Voss gave a nod. Each ship in the Black Fleet was tethered to a neural command lattice buried beneath the main deck of this station, not networked, not shared, individually insulated. Each vessel could disappear and still receive orders by radiation pulse alone. He walked back to his chair, sat down slowly, fingers pressing into the armrest where tactile switches fed real-time atmospheric data from 28 probe points across Earth's upper thermosphere. Every number was drifting. Perfectly imperfect, that was the game. Look broken, never decay. Behind him, the systems officer cleared his throat. They really think we're done, don't they? Boss didn't answer at first. He reached forward, rotating a display sphere with 2 fingers. The sphere spun, showing old council schematics of Sol system territory. Dotted with red flags, restriction zones, treaty markers. Then he expanded the map. More flags, more markers. Entire sectors of human-aligned space reclassified under Concord management. Even the naming conventions had changed. Europa was now listed as Valari Observation Hold 9. It's not that they think we're finished, Voss said finally. It's that they need us to be. They've spent a century painting humans as unstable. Then we lost the Echelon conduit war. We made their narrative easier. He paused, then turned in his seat. Which is why we give them the ending they're craving. They want to study our wreckage, so we build it for them. The silence that followed wasn't ceremonial. It wasn't contemplative. It was operational. Every officer in the room recognizing that the illusion had become the mission. Earth wasn't defending itself anymore. It was curating extinction. Sir, the older officer said quietly. We have 34 maintenance drones on Station F, all reporting minor signal decay in the uplink relay, suggesting atmospheric scatter interference. Boss raised an eyebrow. Council scout path? 2 days out, based on current drift. Too close, Voss muttered. He tapped his console. The display shifted to a simulation model. 87 ships folded into orbital debris, heat signatures fused into old station echoes. Prepare a false weather array, static burst near the relay, and purge any ping history from the subchannel logs. Understood. Outside, Earth rolled on. Its oceans glimmered in fractured light, reflecting no activity. Its orbital belts choked with decay, perfectly arranged chaos. Cities burned through slow electrical throttling. And humanity's silence was no longer just survival. It was an offensive maneuver, sharpened by absence. Commander Rain Voss leaned forward, resting both elbows on the console. His eyes traced the border of Earth's orbit. Not a single active patrol, not one friendly beacon. A grave without a funeral. They wanted us erased, he whispered. We agreed. And beneath the Council's forgotten stations, inside engineered wreckage and abandoned ghosts, the fleet waited. Motionless. Undetected. And alive. If drone's off, Panner, either it's confused or someone's watching. Lieutenant Merrick Rule adjusted the feed on the heads-up display, eyebrows drawing tight as one of the relay maintenance bots drifted 2 degrees off its regular sweep arc. Its strobe light pulsed out of sync with the others, just enough for a council observer to raise questions. Commander Rain Voss moved closer, his boots clicking against the cold, stamped alloy of the floor as the lights dimmed for the feed lock. Behind the screen's glow, his features looked carved from memory, tired, firm, unmoved by error. Swap it, Voss said without hesitation. Shell it, burn the pathing logs, replace with an older shell. Tell command node it's undergoing diagnostics. Merrick hesitated. That's going to look irregular on the return sweep. Voss leaned closer. Only if they're expecting consistency. They aren't. They're expecting decay. The screen shifted as Merrick complied. The bot vanished from feed, overridden by looped telemetry pulled from 2 years prior. To any Council signal analyst, the motion would look like archived data echoing through a degraded node. Which it was, by design. Every beat of Project Echelon's construction had been orchestrated to appear as failure, and that required more artistry than war ever did. Out beyond the viewport, the L5 drift loomed, an orbiting graveyard of spent Council infrastructure, old relay platforms, debris shells from forgotten battles, communications scaffolds abandoned under cost-cutting initiatives. The entire corridor was a place the Council had marked as non-critical. That label alone made it invaluable. Back when I was with Orbital Design, Voss said as he adjusted a secondary data scroll, they told me the Council only abandons what it no longer understands. Turns out, they abandon what they no longer want to fix. Lieutenant Merrick smiled faintly, his gaze still fixed on the rotating shell field. Convenient for us. No, Voss said. It's prophecy. Project Echelon had begun as schematics, hidden inside environmental maintenance schedules. Covert line items folded into public budgeting reports, masked beneath plasma valve recalibrations and orbital cleanup initiatives. The first drones weren't even military. They were sanitation units, outfitted with arc welders and hull sealants, reprogrammed to fabricate modular containment hulls while pretending to fix broken beams. Those hulls became chambers. Those chambers became skeletons. And inside those skeletons, warships were born. Each vessel in the Black Fleet had been assembled over years, piece by piece, module by module, painted as garbage, masked by decay signatures, and placed where Council arrays were weakest. Earth's engineers had deliberately left those gaps in Council sensor calibration protocols during their tenure. Tiny blind zones, statistical dead pixels. Not big enough to raise suspicion, just wide enough to hide a starship. Deploy visual survey sweep, cycle them through Quadrant 6, then reroute to the Vesper Ring. Rotate them irregularly. Merrick glanced up. Irregular patrols raise flags, sir. That's the point, Voss replied. Let them think we're desperate enough to try. It lowers suspicion of the places we're not using. The fleet was designed never to exist. Their engines, cold until needed, were surrounded by containment plates calibrated to emit ambient heat comparable to drifting mining waste. The hulls carried magnetically diffused paint fragments, scraped off retired Council freighters, to scatter spectrometer readings. Their central cores were dead until ignition, and even then only flared once per orbital cycle in a rotation pattern no longer tracked by the outer beacons. Array Ship 62, Malik said quietly, pointing to a slow-moving dot on the display, hasn't completed its atmospheric sync pulse. Delay it, Voss said. Lag sync by 2 full cycles. Introduce ghost echoes in the signal trail. I want it to look like the entire belt is suffering systemic degradation. The command deck remained quiet as the orders filtered through. Every adjustment meant rebalancing multiple false decay trails. But the crew had been trained for this. Every officer here had spent 5 years learning how to make the end of Earth look ugly enough that the Council stopped caring. That was the goal. Not attack, not negotiation, just disinterest. Voss moved to the side alcove where the secondary interface deck stored the fleet's dormant signal map. The projection cast soft blue arcs across the matte wall as he rotated through the registry. Each ship's name wasn't a call sign. They were obituaries. The Veil Doctrine, the Obsidian Chain, the Virel Principle, ships named after failed treaties, dead colonies, and erased voices. Names the galaxy had already forgotten. You ever miss the noise? Merrick asked behind him. Before the silence, I mean. Before this program? Voss didn't turn. He watched the arcs curve and intersect in their orbital ballet, each line a warship that hadn't yet taken breath. I miss consequence, he said. Noise was never the problem. It was volume without reckoning, We screened ourselves into their courtroom and begged for acceptance. And when that didn't work, we cried about betrayal. And now? Now we whisper into their architecture. There was a pause. Then Marie... That doesn't sound like revenge. Boss closed the projection interface. It isn't. He stepped back toward the command chair and lowered himself slowly. The seat adjusted to his weight. Exo supports realigning as the deck lights dimmed for cycle shift. This was never about retribution, he continued. We're not here to punish them. We're here to author the ending they tried to draft for us. He tapped a single command into the console. A display unfurled across the ceiling. Council territory maps layered with color-coded telemetry breaches. Every red dot was a relay Earth had touched, every yellow one a node seeded with dormant subroutines. Every green dot? Confirmed control. Merrick stared at it. That's over 1,000. Voss gave a nod. We never left the network. We just stopped answering their questions. He turned off the screen. Let them write us off, he murmured. They're drafting their own footnotes. Silence returned to the deck, heavy, not oppressive. Chosen. The ships slumbered in their bones. Earth buried beneath static. And the illusion held, stationed. They voted. It passed, 12-0. The words came from Sub-Commander Rule, voice flat as he turned from the central heads-up display. The Council's seal flickered in red across the projection, the approval stamp already encoded into the signal header. Commander Rain Voss didn't blink. He ran a finger along the edge of the console, drawing a line through invisible dust as if sketching something only he could see. The Lexron mandate is now active, Rule continued, quieter this time. Redistribution begins within 72 hours. 72? Voss looked up slowly. That means they've already deployed. Rule gave a short nod. Skimmer fleets entering Sol periphery now. Automated extractors, light escorts, engineering carriers. Just asset recovery teams, on paper. On paper, Voss echoed. The command deck's atmosphere shifted. Officers exchanged glances like musicians waiting for the conductor's raised hand. Outside the viewport, the dead grid lines around Earth's orbital zone glimmered faintly, abandoned satellite debris blinking irregularly, like broken teeth in a mouth too proud to close. They're not expecting resistance, Voss said. They're expecting to gloat. He turned toward the secondary command tier, where another panel lit up, an alert ping radiating across the floor like ripples from an invisible impact. Kinetic sweeps. Low-range Council survey drones had begun their pass. From somewhere deeper in the room came the sound of a hiss, steam lines cycling into redundancy mode, pressure units bleeding energy to appear unregulated. All part of the script. Earth's mask had always been one of rust, disrepair, decay. They wanted the Council to smell the rot. Cade, Voss called. From the upper stairs, a younger officer stepped down, broad-shouldered, dark-eyed, and wearing a uniform 2 decades newer than the others. His collar still bore the mark of Earth's final Naval Academy class before closure. A quiet badge of extinction. Online now, Cade said, adjusting his wrist link as he joined Voss at the primary display. They're pinging our inactive arrays, real slow like they're being polite. They'll stop being polite once they dock. The screen shifted as Cade rotated the feed. Sol system sensor signatures, normally static, flickered with incoming activity. Each Council vessel approached with confidence, assuming that silence meant surrender. Cade tapped one of the red markers. If they see us now, Voss cut him off with a glance. They won't. They're still admiring their reflection. Pause. Cade exhaled, nodding once, but his eyes lingered on the map longer than necessary. Voss knew the look, youth tethered to burden. Cade had never fought a war. His training had been conceptual, simulated, built on whispers. This was his first real deployment. His first real consequence. The false defense grid was already spinning up. From Earth's upper atmosphere, dead satellites surged into erratic motion. Some jittered in place like arthritic limbs. Others rotated wildly, spewing glitchy comm bursts and garbage firewalls meant to appear as rogue AI defense systems. A decades-old solar cannon flickered once, fired a plasma bolt into open space, then shut down in apparent failure. Every reaction was part of the orchestration. The Council would read it as desperate, tragic, misguided. They had no idea what they were walking into. Activate the recursion pulses, Voss ordered. Stage 2 firmware triggers. Begin the bleed. In relay nodes still bearing the Council's original firmware, lines of dormant code stirred. Inserted over years by human contractors, those subroutines sat buried inside boot kernels. Undetected, untouched, and built to survive audits by mimicking Council protocol errors. Now they began waking. Quantum banks, embedded inside defunct communications rings, began corrupting data backlogs with low-level entropy. Navigation charts started recalibrating orientation data. Systems recompiled themselves to introduce subtle errors. Fractional drift, timing slippage, power alignment skew. The result wouldn't be seen yet, but the collapse had already begun. Fleet wake-up sequence? Voss asked. Standing by, Cade replied. Non-broadcast ping engagement only. Optical loops verify sync within acceptable margin. No comms initiated. Voss turned and walked toward the cold deck. The Black Fleet lay embedded in the gray field. Each vessel folded inside reinforced scaffolding, drift mapped to the tiniest orbital variants disguised beneath coded decay. They didn't emerge. They didn't light up. They began to shift, slow, coordinated, like tectonic plates beneath the skin of space. Each ship moved with the silence of something that never wanted to be seen. They didn't decloak. They had never been cloaked to begin with. They simply ceased pretending to be debris. In the control chamber, the lights dimmed as background power was rerouted. New monitors came alive. Thin lines crawling across heads-up displays as warships began to take up their positions. Array 4 has drifted by 9 microns, Merrick Rule called out. Correcting with secondary tethers? Array 12 hull is cold to sensor signature. AI is requesting minor pulse to register baseline movement. Approved, Voss said. Make it look like automated shudder, something natural. The air felt heavier now. It wasn't from gravity flux. It was the weight of a strategy 2 decades old finally leaving rehearsal. Cade stood silent at his station, gaze locked to his panel, but his jaw was clenched. Voss stepped beside him, voice lower now. I told your father I'd keep you off the line. You did, Cade said. And then you buried me in the middle of the fleet. That was before the Council declared us property. A silence hung between them. Cade broke it. Do you think they'll see us for what we are? Voss didn't answer. Instead, he tapped the navigation cycle and watched as the Black Fleet continued its slow positioning, threads of dark matter alignment sinking to gravitational shear points, vectors arcing to hide within blind spots already charted 20 years ago. We're not here to be seen, Voss said finally. We're here to be remembered, without footage. Below the deck, the first set of gravlocks disengaged. Earth had stopped screaming. Now it whispered. Through the systems the Council had forgotten, inside the tools they once controlled. And deep within their own sensor grid, humanity's answer began to take form. Not loud, not sudden, but absolutely, unquestionably, present. They're scanning Jupiter's penumbra. Lieutenant Merrick's voice cut through the silence like a scalpel, deliberate and sharpened. Commander Rain Voss was already moving, the edges of his boots rasping faintly against the grated deck plating as he crossed the bridge. The heads-up display flickered. Radiation signatures, trace emissions, sensor pings mapped in spherical overlays. A new icon pulsed near Jupiter's trailing shadow, its trajectory erratic but not careless. That's not a patrol, Voss said, narrowing his eyes. No, sir. It's a recon-grade scout. Volari make. Long-range neutrino sweep pattern. Slower than a normal sweep. Like it's suspicious, not curious. Voss didn't respond immediately. His jaw set. One hand rose and hovered over the command pad without touching it. That flutter, the one near Station 32, wasn't an error in decay masking. The Council scout had picked up something. Not an object, not a signal, a tremor in the space between, residual neutrino scatter bouncing off a containment chamber that had opened seconds too early. That was all it took. One reading out of rhythm. One line that didn't belong. He turned sharply. Cade, where's Cade? No answer came. Find him now. The moment dragged. Rule checked the lower deck relay and frowned. He took a shuttle to the lower tether array, said there was an issue with coolant purge on Ship 87. The hairs on Voss's arms stiffened. He crossed to the nearest uplink console and pulled the relay. Manual override, he ordered. Open full comms with the engineering node. The screen flared into life, and there he was. Torrin Cade, suspended in the narrow mechanical spine of the tether rig. Shoulders drenched in coolant mist. One arm braced around the interior shaft. Command, I'm stabilizing the secondary fission chamber, he said quickly, voice tighter than usual. Reactor coolant's crystallizing around the conduit. If we don't vent in 15 seconds, the shield plates buckle and the containment shell fractures. Cade, return to deck now, Voss said sharply. Can't, Cade snapped. I'm already inside the rotation field. If I leave now, the chain goes critical. You'll lose 3 ships minimum. Voss opened his mouth to argue, then stopped. There was no time. There was no option, and Cade knew it. I'm locking down the valve manually, Cade continued. Once it's sealed, trigger the magnetic override from your side. Cade. He looked up into the screen and smiled. I told you I'd pull my weight. Then the feed dissolved. A burst of static. The screen went dark. Voss didn't move. The bridge held its breath. Seconds passed. Merrick checked the output diagnostics and spoke, voice strained. Reactor chamber stabilized. Ship 87 intact. Coolant levels corrected. Personnel? Rule checked the signal logs. We lost him. The air had changed. Not the temperature, not the scent. Something else. Like gravity had found new ways to press against the ribs. The crew didn't speak. They didn't reach out. Everyone knew what Cade had done. Voss lowered his hand to the console, fingers pressing slowly into the panel's surface. Not hard, not soft. Controlled. I told him this was survival, he thought, not war. He died believing me. The words never made it out loud. They stayed where they belonged, buried beneath command tone and strategic protocol. Recalibrate fleet disposition, Voss ordered. We're not waiting for another scan. Marek hesitated. You're initiating cold mood? Voss nodded, effective immediately. No debate. No second option. Transfer all command protocols to cold execution layers. Shut down all auxiliary systems. Minimal oxygen, minimal thermals, minimal emission signatures. Every ship in the array enters dormant configuration. Orders filtered through the ship as environmental systems began lowering thresholds. Lights dimmed. Heat siphons reversed to bleed warmth into inertium coils. Even the command deck itself started to cool. Breath fogging just enough to be noticed. Across the system, crews scrambled into thermal retention suits, their body heat preserved only by narrow filament threads built into their fabric. Artificial gravity was disengaged section by section to reduce energy bleed. Communication systems flickered offline, then blinked back, transformed into silent spectrum pulse relays that operated off vibration and interference mapping rather than signal waves. The Black Fleet, once dormant, had now become frostborn. Each ship settled into new position, curved deeper into Council relay alignments. They would move only on pre-programmed vectors, No commands, no corrections, only triggers, automated to respond to very specific changes in enemy behavior. They wouldn't shoot. They would erase the enemy's ability to function. And now the strategy had changed. This wasn't a trap anymore. It was containment inversion. Voss stood at the viewport, watching Earth's horizon slowly rotate beneath the rim of cloud-wrapped blue. In the silence, he imagined the heat bleeding from Cade's lifeless body as the coolant froze around him. No recognition. No monument. Just a hollow inside an array of forgotten wreckage. He didn't let the emotion rise. He couldn't. Not now. This was supposed to be clean, Malik said behind him. Surgical. Unseen. It still is, Voss answered. We just lost our last luxury. That was the final casualty I allowed for. No more deaths. Ermac exhaled, his face pale. What's our new objective? Voss didn't turn. Seize the system. Voss finally looked over his shoulder. Without being noticed, they've entered our orbit stack with flags raised and weapons armed. That's not a survey, they came to collect. Lieutenant Merrick stood rigid at the primary deck rail, eyes fixed on the laser plasma display overlaying Earth's orbital grid. Red-coated council vessels, 40 at first count, had crossed the threshold above Sol's equator, forming a crescent arc that gleamed with confidence. Commander Rain Voss stepped forward without a word, the air around him dry and sterile from the oxygen suppressants already thinning the bridge's atmosphere. Every surface was cool to the touch, even his chair, chilled steel filtered through polymer mesh. The discomfort kept him alert. Another cluster of dots entered the grid, pulsing at measured intervals. Rule confirmed. That's the secondary armada. 76 confirmed ship signatures. Majority in blockade formation, no support beacons. They're acting autonomous. Voss tilted his head slightly. They expect silence. We've trained them well. Across the upper sensor dome. A trail of Council relay drones marked their own alignment in planetary sync. Their rotations were smooth, predictable, obedient, just as they had been programmed to appear. What the Council never understood was that obedience could be the deadliest disguise. Activate handshake protocol, Voss said. Acknowledged, Merrick replied. Firing handshake bursts through ghost satellites, 30-second pulse windows cycling across tiered signal nodes. From Earth's decommissioned comm towers came false compliance signals, flickering error codes, legacy handshake confirmations, pre-trip encryption structures still recognized by Council fleet software. They didn't raise alarms. They did the opposite. They invited trust. Each ping was a Trojan. Inside those pulses were payloads of recursive logic, code folded into code, layered like a spiral inside an hourglass. Nothing explosive, no alarms, just a new timing schema. A false internal timestamp, repeating every 7 milliseconds, reprocessing every ship's navigational mesh. Voss moved to the central rail and looked out over the cold tactical map. His eyes narrowed as the first shift began. Visual drift, he asked. Merrick nodded once. Confirmed. 2 vessels in carrier group Theta reporting slight orientation irregularities. Rotational micro-corrections misfiring. Rule added. No response from their internal counterbalance systems. AI routines are relinking with backup gyros. The map didn't shake, it trembled. One cruiser nudged sideways on its own. Another ship tried to recorrect, but the course alteration fed back into the recursive loop. A single angle misread became a chain reaction across the relay web. And none of the Council ships realized they were no longer piloting anything. Watch this next one, Voss muttered, voice just above a whisper. On the left flank, 2 assault vessels rotated simultaneously into correction patterns. Their vector shifts overlapped. The collision wasn't spectacular. It was awkward. One side of the lead vessel scraped against the second ship's nose, sending both into lateral tumble. Energy dispersal systems triggered wrongly, igniting a brief discharge that struck their own sensor nets. Rule's brow furrowed. They're blaming us already. Signal intercepts show accusations of sensor ghosting and jamming. They think we hijacked their starboard array. Voss stared at the tumbling ships. We didn't hijack anything, he said. They handed us their keys 20 years ago. Down on Earth, the planet remained quiet. Cities kept power loads dim. Coastal scanners relayed falsified weather patterns. Even civilian towers continued cycling static backscatter, giving the impression of a fractured infrastructure barely limping under old weight. The Black Fleet remained motionless beneath the drift corridors, curved into Council relay arcs, nested under inactive debris masks, tucked behind old mining husks. Not one ship revealed itself. And yet every one of them was locked into vector. EMP pass finalized, Merrick reported. Each Black Fleet vessel aligned with a primary Council target. Range, 28 meters, holding. Voss leaned on the command rail, palms pressed into the cooled surface. His breath slowed. The next move wasn't a launch. It wasn't a strike. It was the extraction of functional control. Do we broadcast warning? Rule asked. Voss shook his head. They're already listening. They just don't recognize the voice. He tapped the override on the interface. On the opposite end of the bridge, the status lights around the outer casing of the EMP cores began to glow. Dull blue, like the kind of dawn that doesn't promise warmth. Each ship held a suppression field. Each field was tuned to exactly one target. Their positions had been calculated from Council patrol schematics archived before the blockade. Every maneuver since then had been predictable. Earth hadn't needed real-time surveillance. It had needed memory. Final confirmation, Merrick said. EMP delivery is sequenced. Charges are locked to internal bleed. No hull fragmentation, no energy spike beyond thermal fog. Civilians? Rule asked, his voice lower now. Voss glanced at him. They came to an inhabited planet in full conquest formation. Any losses they incur fall under their own doctrine. He straightened. Mark Fleet operational. Merrick logged it. Then Voss spoke, more for the crew than the system. This isn't defense, it's extraction. The lights dimmed again as the ships prepared to trigger, coordinated in silence. All that remained was one command, and the moment to pull it, execute. Commander Rain Voss didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The word carried like a verdict. Heavy, clear, final. Merrick tapped the sequence node. Across the heads-up display, Earth's orbital layers lit in a staccato burst of transmission acknowledgments. 84 separate confirmations, each locked to its own target. In less than a heartbeat, the system responded. Black Fleet vessels, still cloaked in drift debris and nested beneath relay skeletons, shifted. No burn, no thrust. Just synchronized expansion as directional EMP emitters deployed from under-armored panels and fixed their paths. Tension built, not in alarms or chaos, but in the air itself. The ship's environmental system had been cut back for an hour now. Condensation clung to sleeves, joints ached under chill. Voss exhaled through clenched teeth and nodded once. The EMP wave detonated. It was not a sound, it was a rupture in function. Council warships blinked out of life, not as a cascade, as a command. Their reactors failed to cycle, navigation cores defaulted to maintenance modes. FTL routers disconnected from origin locks. Weapons entered safety state shutdowns. External comms began looping internal diagnostics like they were stuck in startup. Every redundant control failed in harmony. 22 seconds, that's all it took. On the central deck, Rule's knuckles whitened as he monitored the crash telemetry. 71 offline instantly, 13 delayed shutdowns. Secondary shielding delayed, total collapse. But they're following, Marlick whispered as he stared at the chaotic visual overlay. They never even fired. Inside those ships, crews scrambled. Lights died. Floors froze. Backup systems refused to activate because their pulse identifiers had been rewritten to classify the crew as hostile variables. Survival suits inflated, pod hatches hissed open, pressurized tubes ejecting living bodies into black orbit. Tiny silver flecks scattered across the void, human and non-human, each expelled like a thoughtless algorithm. One of the Council ships rotated unevenly, its gyroscopes overcompensating. It clipped the support beams of a second vessel, sending both into a tumble. Across the map, other ships began drifting into unfamiliar patterns, all orientation cues corrupted. Rule inhaled sharply. There. Port 9B, one of ours, Black 6, caught in an evasive slide. Voss turned his head just as the image flickered. A sharp arc in trajectory, a venting coil burst. Then silence. Lost contact, Merrick confirmed. Hull breach, energy core collapsed. Crew status, 12, no survivors. The bridge held its breath. Voss gave no visible reaction. His shoulders didn't tense. His eyes didn't flicker, but his fingers pressed against the side of his thigh, the movement invisible to most. Tally updated, he said. Across the remainder of the Black Fleet, nothing moved. They did not advance. They did not fire. They only hovered, ghosts guarding a graveyard. Council comms, he asked. Rule nodded grimly. Absolute collapse. Their fleet mesh is in recursive sync failure. Multiple bridge AIs have switched to offline training subroutines. No data continuity between ships. They're locked in sandbox logic loops. The screen showed drifting warships, engines dark, turrets drooping, bodies floating in nearby ejection tubes. No beams, no explosions, no glory, just the absence of function. Return fire? Voss asked. Malik shook his head. Nothing. No targeting systems online. They haven't even tried manual override. Half their crews are stuck in simulation prompts. He didn't smile. None of them did. Keep comms offline, Voss said. No gloating, no signal trace. Silence returned. Outside, Earth spun quietly beneath the wreckage. The clouds reflected light back into the hulls above, pale and flickering like heartbeat echoes. The remains of the Council Armada tumbled in rotational drift, entire vessels helpless, directionless, unintelligible to their own command networks. And the Black Fleet stood around them, unmoving. Guardians from nowhere. One final act remained. Voss moved to the signal terminal and retrieved the locked transmission. It had been prepared years earlier. The image it contained was simple. Earth, viewed from above, surrounded by the husks of foreign ships, Council vessels frozen in defeat, unburnt, untouched, and behind them, arranged in ghost formations, the outlines of Earth's own ships, barely visible, like reflections in shattered glass. He sent it to Council Core. No text, no encryption, no malware. Just a single image. What now? Rule asked softly. We don't follow up, Voss said. We vanish. Like nothing happened. Voss finally turned from the screen, eyes colder now. Like nothing was ever there to begin with. Explain to me how 84 warships lost power in orbit, and your entire species failed to notice. Valerie Delicate Zarn gripped the edge of his standing disk, claws tapping rhythmically against the heat glass surface. His scales twitched with each word, flicking crimson in the artificial dome light of the Grand Concord chamber. Across the assembly floor, Threx Minister Jorvan adjusted his translator ring with mechanical calm. Your data relay nodes were responsible for 90% of Earth's system uplinks. We inherited those frameworks. We didn't write them. You're suggesting sabotage through your own negligence, Zarn snapped. I'm suggesting, Jorvan replied, voice like ice hitting a stone basin, that someone turned your listening posts into mirrors, and you spent 20 years admiring yourselves. The floor erupted. Delegates from the Hentari, Surakt, and Undec delegations began shouting in multiple frequencies, some verbal, others encoded into light pulse or ferric tremors. The chamber's central dome struggled to adapt, dampening sensory input to tolerable levels. The council's speaker attempted order, but had no leverage left to enforce it. The Lexron mandate, once proudly introduced as a measure to reclaim neglected orbital zones, was now flagged across all internal records as under indefinite review. It would never be reinstated. Through Sol, not after Earth rewrote the risk equation. Inside the war archives, military analysts huddled around corrupted sync maps. None of them made sense. Entire fleets had spun out of formation, crippled by internal loops that shouldn't have been possible. FTL orientation data had been hijacked by logic references that didn't exist in any known schema. One council technician, pulling her third straight shift without rest, stared at the crawl logs and muttered to herself. None of the variables were inserted. They were always there, like they were sleeping. The phrase would be picked up later by defense briefings and added to the official term now circulating, Echelon collapse event. The label didn't explain anything, but it sounded definitive. That was enough for politicians. In the aftermath, dozens of emergency summits were called. Not one found consensus. The Valari accused the Threx of quietly collaborating with human engineers during Earth's exile. The Threx countered by revealing archived gate signatures that proved Valari envoys had visited Sol orbit years after the protocol lockdown. On-deck records surfaced, showing internal database corruption matching Earth's relay schemas. But their government disavowed the logs as forged. Somebody somewhere had seeded the Council's infrastructure with recursive decay, and nobody knew how deep it went. Back at Black Fleet Command, the lights had been dimmed. No celebration, no music, no public broadcasts. The deck was colder now than it had been even during cold mode. Most of the crew had already rotated out, assigned to atmospheric civilian stations, memory sealed under Directive Vesper. Their service records now read, Simulated Protocol Oversight, Archive Only. Commander Rain Voss stood alone at the center of the command bridge. His uniform had been stripped of tags, the collar unfastened. In front of him, a single laser plasma interface displayed the mission ledger, flickering softly with the final sequence of Earth's silent campaign. 72 Council vessels still drifted. No recovery attempt had succeeded. 12 ships had been towed to anchor points by Council drones. Each one failed to reboot. Engineers attempting manual overrides had reported sudden magnetic lockouts and corrupted life support diagnostics that triggered emergency protocols mid-strength. It was as if a Shishin was gone. One drone crew suffocated when an airlock cycled twice within a second. Their last signal? An error string that read, Existing Linear Authority. Back on the bridge, Voss keyed in his final transmission. Directive closure affirmed, awaiting silence. He didn't sign it. Didn't timestamp it. I didn't submit it through proper channels. He placed it into a legacy transband for Centrify, one of the old Council's spectrum carriers the galaxy had stopped using centuries ago. It would circulate indefinitely, unacknowledged, unarchived, unread, and it would never be traced. He stepped off the platform, gloves in one hand, coat folded over his forearm. The corridor beyond the deck was empty, not by order, by understanding. Everyone knew this wasn't a victory. There would be no statue, no anthem. Only one reality had changed. Earth was no longer a question in Council archives. It had become a blank space. On his way to the hangar, Voss passed a side monitor that displayed live Council chamber footage. Another shouting match, more accusations. Below the screen, an unnoticed message flashed from the diplomatic relays. It read, Incident status, unable to classify. He powered the screen down. Behind him, the Black Fleet entered final standby, drifting into shadow corridors mapped long before this war began. And somewhere deep in Council space, a young archivist reviewing old Echelon war records came across an unreferenced designation tied to a satellite array in Sol orbit. The file refused to open, the screen locked, and across every open line in that office, a message displayed in black and white text. No header, no origin. We were finished, you weren't watching. Are they still up there? The child's voice echoed faintly through the underground transit corridor as she looked up toward the static, crowded newsfeed looped across the station wall. A smiling anchor recited government lines about orbital relay malfunctions and satellite repositioning tests, pausing every so often to nod with programmed concern. Her grandfather didn't answer right away. He stared at the screen longer than he needed to, then gently tugged her coat sleeve. "Eat your rice," he said. "The forecast says there's snow tonight." Across Earth, the story was already sealed. Official narrative signed, distributed, and archived. A routine solar storm had triggered cascading system failures. Several orbital relay clusters had entered shutdown to prevent catastrophic power surges. Damage assessments were ongoing, but civilian impact was minimal. Nothing to worry about. No reason to question the sky. The real story remained sealed in encrypted bunkers and private transmission corridors, accessible only to command-tier systems. Even those would be purged after 72 hours, per directive writ silent. The Black Fleet had returned to the dark. From orbit, its re-entry had not been tracked by any nation-state observatory or corporate satellite. Their return vectors were folded into the noise signatures of atmospheric deflection layers. Not one trajectory aligned with known Lagrange corridors. The fleet dispersed across dead zones, unenchanted belts, planetary eclipse shadows, rings of ancient debris, disappearing into places no longer listed on any map that mattered. Beneath the European basin, inside a sealed chamber built for wartime redundancy, Admiral Garen Volt reviewed the post-separation audit. The room had no chairs, no wall plaques, no unit banners. It was not a place built for memory. "Are we the only ones who know the full chain?" he asked. Across the table, the archivist didn't blink. "There are 3 copies of the master code root. One was never opened. The second self-deleted. You're speaking to the third." "And was?" Confirmation. The archivist rotated a small data crystal across the desk's surface. It carried no seal. Last visual feed places him on an unmarked transport. No beacon, no pilot log, no cargo tag. Course data was set before launch and wiped in transit. He didn't log a destination. Volt studied the crystal but didn't reach for it. "Final report?" The archivist folded his hands. "1 line." Volt nodded slowly. "Say it." Directive closure affirmed, awaiting silence. He exhaled through his teeth. "And now?" The archivist's voice dropped. "Now the silence answers them." Elsewhere, across Council territories, fleets were grounded. Entire battalions of engineers tore apart their internal systems looking for inconsistencies. Every fleet node that had connected to Sol's orbital handshakes was ordered into quarantine. Several AI networks flagged each other as corrupted and initiated isolation protocols without external prompting. Synchronization matrices between navigation grids failed under checksum misalignments. Shared orientation software returned error strings in dead dialects. The Concord of systems called for a temporary suspension of gate activity across 10 sectors. Civilian traffic stalled. Trade lanes choked. Dozens of border stations switched to emergency supply mode. On the Council's primary analytics array, an enormous planetary lattice responsible for fleet coordination, an entry appeared, unprompted. It bypassed firewalls, mirrored protocols, and didn't request acknowledgement. It didn't arrive through comms. It was embedded inside the checksum line of every fleet synchronization update. 6 words. Fixed. Uneditable. Locked by checksum dependencies so foundational that altering them would crash the entire data mesh. "We were finished. You weren't watching." Attempts to purge it triggered failovers. Redundancy spirals followed. After 3 failures, system administrators stopped trying. Officially, they declared it a display artifact. Unofficially, they marked it as observe only. It became a line no one touched. Not out of reverence, out of fear. On Earth, the newsfeed slowly shifted back to economic forecasts and weather reports. The orbital chaos was no longer referenced. Memorials were not held. There were no names to mourn. No parade returned the fleet. No medal was struck with Voss's likeness. His uniform remained unclaimed in a locker beneath the L5 command node, sealed beside a copy of Cade's flight log. At a quiet hilltop installation in former Chilean territory, a disused satellite uplink station blinked twice and then stopped for good. Its only visitor for the next 2 years would be a pair of children chasing a bird through the grass. The war, as far as the world knew, had never happened. But beyond Earth, lines were redrawn. The Council's expansion models were rewritten. New fleet simulations included Earth's potential re-entry into galactic affairs, but were marked "Do not initiate engagement." Mapping software now labeled Sol's perimeter in neutral gray. Scout vessels plotted course lines that veered wide. Automated drones coded with exploration parameters now defaulted to caution mode when nearing Earth's telemetry belt. Across multiple species, doctrines adjusted. New cadets were taught about the Sol collapse. No one explained it. They simply taught avoidance. One species, the Rith, began calling Earth by a new term in their native language, Vakrelen, which roughly translated to that which looks back. They believed something had awakened in silence and watched, not to attack, not to speak, not to reclaim its place, but to remain standing. And sometimes, in council bars and backroom strategy sessions, a story passed between officers, of ships lost without combat, of fleets frozen above a blue planet that didn't say a word, and of a transmission that wasn't a threat, wasn't a boast, and wasn't even directed at them. Just a sentence, buried in code, refusing to vanish. We were finished, you weren't watching. And for the first time in recorded galactic history, silence became a deterrent. Earth didn't return. It didn't respond. It didn't declare itself reborn. It simply built in places no one would follow. And the Council, for all its strength, did not chase. They had seen what lay behind the curtain. Not vengeance, not desperation. Just a species that rewrote its own ending without ever asking for permission. And the story held, forever defined not by what Earth said, but by what it no longer needed to say. The fleet in black was never seen again. The silence, however, stayed. What would you have done if you were in Voss's place? Vanish into silence or reveal the truth to the galaxy? Comment your answer down below. And if this story gripped you from orbit to ending, hit that subscribe button for more thrilling HFY stories.